Thanks for joining us for another deep dive into all things people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. You're probably thinking, hey, something looks a little different here and feels a little different. And you're right. We're in a different studio because our crews are working hard to get Studio C next door ready for our Halloween special tomorrow morning. That's usually where we shoot The Pulse. But what hasn't changed is this being your home for straight facts. So buckle up. There's a lot to get to tonight. In fact, it's part 3 of our interviews with the top 3 contenders in recent polls for the state's top job. Democratic Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is here talking about the SNAP benefits at risk for millions of Americans, what she says needs to be done, and her thoughts on working with President Trump. Plus, from the Fed's interest rate cut to the government shutdown, a lot impacting the economy and your wallet. We're talking with Oakland University economics professor Michael Greiner to make some sense of all of it. And yes, we can do that still. The world is confusing, but we're going to make some sense of it, at least when it comes to your dollars. But we begin tonight with the government shutdown and less than 2 days to go before a key deadline sparking fear for millions of Americans. 30 days, 5 days shorter than the longest in history, and both sides still dug in and not budging. And while the White House has moved money around to make sure the military is paid, it refuses to do the same thing to tap into funds for food aid, which you know as SNAP benefits. And it comes just months after President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill delivered those massive cuts to that program, which could end up with more than 2 million people losing those benefits and in turn losing a lot of food. And right now at the state capitol, there's a battle over filling the holes that SNAP benefit pause will create. You see, the state Senate passed a $71 million program to serve as a stopgap for people who rely on that SNAP. That still needs approval from the House before it can actually go into effect. And Governor Whitmer also moved $4.5 million to the Food Bank Council of Michigan. That would basically help pantries in all 83 Michigan counties stock up ahead of the SNAP suspension. But here's the issue. Here's the thing. That $71 million is dead on arrival in the Senate. House Speaker Matt Hall says the proposal's political, saying the money for food banks should help cover families in need, adding they have a $30 million budget if more money is needed.
This bill by the Democrats is performative. It's fake, okay? And the real solution is what Governor Whitmer and the House Republicans are working on together. I mentioned how we put this $30 million in the budget for a circumstance similar to this. We're drawing $4.5 million of that, okay? Well, it's up to $30 million, but what I'm saying is, and then we're going to work together week to week, and we're going to see what we can do week to week to plug the holes. I've said we can't solve, and everyone knows this, including Brinks. We don't have the resources as a state to pay for these federal programs.
Now, this might be the most important thing I say this entire program, so please listen up. If you or someone you know is in need of food assistance, there are resources available. You're not out of luck. Just scan the QR code on the bottom right of your screen right there. The resources are there on that story when you click on that little QR code. Remember, you are not alone, and there is always help. President Donald Trump giving a recap of his highly anticipated meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, the leaders of the 2 largest economies in the world, sitting down for a talk in South Korea. Both sides saying the meeting went well and saying they're willing to work with one another. Aboard Air Force One, President Trump says he made several deals with the Chinese leader.
Tremendous amounts of the soybeans and other farm products are going to be purchased immediately, starting immediately. On fentanyl, we agreed that he was going to work very hard to stop the flow.
What will your new tariff rate on China's goods be once you sign the deal?
Other than what the tariffs remain exactly the same.
55%.
It's about, no, it was 57, now it's 47.
China's president says it's natural for 2 massive economies like these to have disagreements, but he says it's fully possible for both nations to prosper together. President Trump says he plans to visit China in April. He says President Xi will be coming to the U.S. at some point as well. The president also making an explosive announcement on social media. He says he's telling the Department of Defense to immediately resume testing nuclear weapons. This is in response to other nations that are doing that. Over the past 2 decades, the only country known to test nuclear bombs is North Korea. The U.S. hasn't done it since 1992. China and Russia also stopped back in the 1990s. But the president, well, he thinks now is the time.
To do with
with others. They seem to all be nuclear testing. We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. You know, we've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
Any details around that testing, sir? Like where, when?
It'll be announced. You know, we have test sites. It'll be announced.
A spokesperson for the Chinese leader is urging the U.S. not to do it. A Russian spokesperson says if the U.S. does it, they'll do it as well. President Trump says despite the announcement, he's still advocating for denuclearization. But in the meantime, the Asia tour is over. President Trump now heading back to the United States. And that's just scratching the surface, believe it or not. So let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories making news in the world of politics right now. The top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee blasting the Trump administration after Democrats were not invited to a briefing this week on U.S. military strikes on boats accused of carrying drugs. Virginia Senator Mark Warner said the move is, quote, against every norm of how national security policy has worked, adding the move could endanger troops. Lawmakers on both sides have questioned the attacks that have killed 61 people so far. And next week, senators are expected to vote on a war powers resolution banning strikes in or near Venezuela unless Congress gives approval. To the courtroom now, where a federal judge rules the Food and Drug Administration broke the law by slapping restrictions on medication used for abortions and miscarriage management. The agency decided to maintain restrictions on those in 2023, but the Hawaii federal judge says that was unlawful because it didn't give an explanation. The ruling orders the FDA to look at evidence it allegedly disregarded, but the restrictions are still in place. And the Justice Department stripping references to the January 6th insurrection from court papers and punishing two prosecutors who included them. This involves a case of a man who was arrested with guns and ammo near former President Obama's home. That man was charged in the 2021 Capitol riot, but you'll remember President Trump pardoned every single one of them charged in the attack on his first day in office. The new filings also don't include a reference to the fact President Trump posted on social media with what he claimed was Obama's address the same day the suspect was arrested in Obama's neighborhood. The prosecutors who included the references were put on leave. The DOJ refuses to comment. Well, to the race for governor, where it is part 3 of our interviews with the candidates. This after a poll shows Democrat Jocelyn Benson, Republican John James, and Independent Mike Duggan all neck and neck. We'll hear from Benson in Studio A in just a few minutes. But in case you missed it, I asked both Duggan and James about Governor Whitmer's ability to work with President Trump. Here's what they told us.
Governor Whitmer repeatedly went to the White House, pitched the president. When he came here and gave her credit, what happened? First tweet, Jocelyn Benson, there's nothing to celebrate here. Attacking the governor for bringing 5,000 jobs to Michigan because she worked with Donald Trump. I think what Governor Whitmer has done is the right thing. She's looking for people in Michigan first, and she knew she was going to get criticized for working with Republicans. But at the end of the day, each of us makes a decision. Are you a Democrat first, or do you represent the people of Michigan first? And Governor Whitmer, I think, is showing really good leadership.
President Trump has repeatedly complimented Governor Gretchen Whitmer on the job that she's done, called her a nice woman, saying she's doing a great job. Do you agree with this assessment?
Well, you know, even a failing grade, if you get 3 questions right on a 20-point test, you get 15%. That's a failing grade. I think Gretchen Whitmer, frankly, has presided over a population decline, unemployment, with some of the harmful regulations, not even including the COVID shutdowns, which hurt our seniors and hurt our school-age children, that we're still feeling the reverberations right now.
But in recent years has tried to work with the president to stop Asian carp, the invasive species.
When it's politically expedient, sure, you're not going to get a pass on that. The leader of the state of Michigan needs to put the people of the state of Michigan first, not go to the White House, cover your face with blue binders because you're still a partisan at heart who's trying to get elected president.
There's a lot more to both of those interviews. If you want to watch them, just scan the QR code on the bottom right of your screen. You'll find every episode of The Pulse we've done. We've covered a lot of ground, and we're glad you've been with us for so much of the ride. Welcome back to The Pulse, where we talk all things people, power, and politics. As we have been all week, we're talking to candidates running for both city and statewide office. We began the week talking to the mayoral candidates. And yes, through this week, we are talking to the top 3 contenders in the gubernatorial race. And today we're joined by Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. And Secretary, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on The Pulse.
Thanks always for having me, Roop.
Well, I do want to begin by asking you the obvious question right now. If you were governor of the state of Michigan right now and you have this crisis on your hands, it's looming this weekend with SNAP benefits running out, what do you do to help the people who are both Republican and Democrats who are hungry on the other side of that camera?
We treat it exactly like what it is, a crisis. 1.4 million Michiganders will lose access to food right before the holidays. And we're about to hit Thanksgiving in a few weeks. It is gut-wrenching. And, you know, right now government is showing up everywhere we don't want it and nowhere where we need it. This is where we need it. And so as governor, I'll work with anyone at the local level, calling our mayors, working with philanthropic organizations, asking citizens to be a part of supporting their fellow citizens in this moment, continuing to advocate at the federal level that they get this shutdown ended, that they get to work, come to the table, come to an agreement that won't hurt people, but will fund our government, and at the same time use every tool in the toolbox, every lever, every partnership to make sure we're keeping people fed at every level and we're helping people who are struggling get through this difficult moment.
When you look at what Democrats are saying, and I know you're saying, you know, using all the techniques to talk to people in Washington, if you are the governor and you're talking to your colleagues in Washington, shouldn't we be telling Democrats, hey, I get that you want to extend these subsidies for Obamacare, but man, people are going to be missing food come Saturday. Shouldn't Democrats be the ones to turn around and say, we got to do something. We got to open this government back up?
I think the reason why we're having this conversation is because Democrats are doing something. They're saying this isn't right. We can't pass a budget that rips health care away from people who need it and doesn't fund important things like food banks and other things that are necessary for people who are struggling. And so in this moment where Republicans are in charge of every aspect of federal government, it is important for Democrats to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, you can't just slash all of these things. They're going to hurt people. And then it's important for everyone to recognize that at the end of the day, we serve the people. No matter if they voted for us or not, whatever side of the aisle the citizens fall on, our job is to make their lives easier, to save them time, to save them money. And we need to, all of us, and governors as well, come to Washington and remind people who they serve, who they work for, and share the stories of people who are struggling in all of our states because of the inaction, indecision, and challenges that we're seeing play out at the federal level.
But are Democratic lawmakers, in your mind, as a Democrat who's running for governor, putting the cart before the horse, talking about health care subsidies that may or may not be talked about in the future, while at the same time cutting off the neck for food in the meantime?
I hope, and I know there's ongoing conversations happening at Washington with Democrats and Republicans figuring out how to keep people fed in times like this. But the important job of a governor in a moment like this as well is to recognize that here in Michigan, I have a responsibility to make sure whether you live in Alpena or in Iron Mountain or in Detroit or Grand Rapids, that I'm going to be showing up in your community, working with partners at the local level to fill the void of the federal government support right now and make sure people are getting the food, the health care, the other support that they need.
Do you think we have the resources to do that right now, should the benefits run out on Saturday?
We'll never alleviate all of the pain, but we can mitigate it. We can mitigate it and find folks who can support with their time, their treasure, their talent to invest in communities and help alleviate some of the pain. So the philanthropic community is going to be key in moments like this. State and local officials who can find other ways to meet budget needs when the federal government fails. We have to look at it as a Band-Aid, mitigating the pain so that we can get through this moment while still pushing the federal government to do their job and help us keep people safe.
I want to ask you about working with President Trump and the feds. Governor Whitmer went to Washington, secured 5,000 jobs for Selfridge, and came back and was literally by Democrats that I have a list of the people who actually wrote press releases about how we shouldn't trust this president and how this was not all great, this meeting. Do you think that that's essentially the problem with politics? The governor goes to work with the president and she gets ripped apart by her own party?
Well, certainly, I think anytime a governor is creating more jobs for the state of Michigan, it's a great thing for our state, no matter who you're working with or who claims credit. And for those particular jobs, you know, Senator Stabenow, Senator Peters, and Senator Slotkin subsequently also worked a great deal to make sure we were keeping Selfridge open and expanding those jobs. I come from a military family. My husband served in the Army. I'm a military spouse. I know firsthand how important it is that we can come together and say, no matter who gets the credit, that we're investing in these jobs, we're investing in our military service members. And so I was very proud and glad that everyone was able to work together to get that done. But at the same time, you can also talk about the other things that the administration is doing, like reckless economic tariff policies that are hurting our farmers, that are hurting our families, that are hurting our small business owners. And a governor's job is to be able to fight for the people of Michigan, no matter who that means working for, and also no matter who that means standing up to.
You would go take a meeting with President Trump and sit down just like the governor did to try to secure jobs?
Yes, of course, absolutely. That would be my responsibility as governor, to work with anyone, even if we disagree on everything, to agree on the fact that we have a responsibility to help the people of Michigan and the people of this country have access to well-paying jobs, especially during a moment where the cost of living is skyrocketing. I mean, the number one job of the next governor is to work with everyone you can to ensure we're reducing the costs in this state and addressing the affordability crisis while creating well-paying jobs that help people thrive.
What do we do about the education crisis that's hitting this state right now?
That's the foundation for getting there, where we can have a affordable environment where everyone can thrive in well-paying jobs. I want Michigan, and I say this as a former teacher and as the daughter of 2 special education teachers and as a mom, I want Michigan to have the best education system in the country. And my hope, my goal as governor is to be able to work with anyone, including partners in communities all across the state, to ensure not only are we preparing our kids to read and have math and other things, but that we're investing in arts education that also help kids thrive, that we're investing in apprenticeship programs that give people on-the-job training, no matter what job they want to go into. Other states have figured out how to bring their education system into this century. We need to do that too, and that will be one of the things that I'm most committed to and dedicated to doing as governor.
Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, good to see you here tonight on The Pulse. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, what happens in Washington doesn't stay in Washington. The Fed deciding on perhaps another rate cut, what that means for you and what you should do when it comes to big decisions in your household. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse, here to talk about how the government shutdown and the Fed's lowering of a key interest rate affects all of us. Oakland University Associate Professor of Management, Michael Greiner, and it is so good to see you. Thanks for joining us on The Pulse tonight.
It's great to be here.
So let's talk about these interest rate cuts, because, you know, the bottom line is people watching on the other side of that camera are saying, how does this affect me? Right away, when you look at this set of cuts, what does this mean for people on the other side of that camera?
Well, you know, this is the irony here, which is that it's kind of a mixed bag, because you have to remember that interest rates are actually set in a market, the same way it is like with anything else, where, you know, there are people essentially who have money, who are trying to lend it out, and people who are borrowing money, and there's kind of this negotiation that goes on to try to find the best price for it. And the price that they pay are interest rates, obviously. Okay, so what happens then is that the people who are involved in this market essentially try to figure out what's the place that you want to be kind of going forward, you know, because interest rates obviously aren't something that change from one day to the next typically. And as a result of that, what we've seen is that there had been kind of priced into the interest rates that are kind of generally available already, the expectation that we're going to see more cuts coming up. Well, that all changed then when the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, got up and said, you know, we might not be cutting interest rates anymore after this, and you shouldn't get so comfortable in that. So the interesting thing is actually interest rates on a lot of the consumer mortgages and that type of thing actually went up after the Fed cut its interest rate, which isn't what you would typically expect.
But that's interesting, because when the first cut came, we talked about it on this show and on the news, of course. Hey, the interest rates are being cut. And then everyone was saying, you know what, maybe I'll just wait to see if that second cut will come. So consumer behavior is affected by expectation, and the economy is driven by that.
Absolutely, yeah. So much of economics is psychology, really, is what it comes down to. You know, it's what people expect to happen, you know, and actually that's very much how inflation works, for example, is that what people expect is going to happen is really what drives whether inflation is going to go up or down over the long term. Because if people think inflation is going to keep going up, then they're going to ask for higher wages, which then in turn turn into, higher costs than for everything.
Is it a sort of good news that the Fed decided not to change the interest rate again, perhaps kind of looking at the first interest rate cut saying, hey, I think we got things under control?
Yeah, actually, I think it is. But, you know, here's the problem is that the Fed right now, they're kind of in a tough spot. You know, they've got this dual mandate. On the one hand, they're supposed to deal with unemployment. You know, their goal is to try to keep as many people employed as possible. On the other hand, they're supposed to deal with inflation. And there are actually two conflicting goals here, because if you get too much employment, that's when you start to get more inflation. If you get too much inflation, then that starts to hurt. Exactly.
Reminds me of a doctor,
can't have both of them.
A doctor looking at a patient, perhaps not in intensive care, but trying to balance the medications in the IV.
That's exactly
right,
what
to
it's
figure
like.
it out. Okay, so in the 3 minutes we have left on this, talk about how this affects people at home. You know, it really pains me to think that where I grew up in Troy, or where I live in northern Oakland County, there are neighbors, friends, people that we know that are going to suffer because of what happens on Saturday. Talk for a moment about this government shutdown and the SNAP benefits specifically.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that people rely on, and as you already described at the beginning of the show, this is something that the Congress had been cutting back on, actually, with this One Big Beautiful Act bill that was passed not too long ago, and so there have been concerns about the impact that was going to be coming to SNAP anyway. The fact that this is being stopped at a time when people should be aware of the fact that there are actually funds available. It's just that the president essentially has chosen not to essentially move those funds around to be able to make them continue the same way that he has been able to do, say, for example, with the military, where he has been able to keep payments going at least for the time being.
And the USDA is arguing that the $5 billion that's sitting there in the coffers, that's used for natural disasters and that kind of a thing. But the bottom line is that's at the discretion of the leader of the free world.
That's exactly right.
What happens moving forward? How long does this go? And I guess when you do the political calculus and the economic analysis, how long can this go before states go, okay, I can't help anymore. We need the feds to kick in again?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen sooner rather than later. I mean, you have to remember the big difference between state government and the federal government is state government needs to have a balanced budget. So they can't just kind of spend and borrow and not worry about the future the way, frankly, the federal government can. So the federal government, when you get into a crisis, they're kind of the funder of last resort. They're the ones who are able to essentially create money out of thin air and generate it when we need it. And so kind of the principle is that when there is a crisis, the federal government has to step in. The states can kind of try to fill that gap for a little while, but it's not going to be for very long because really they're limited in what they can do.
And you'll just look at the figures. When you hear people say in the state of Michigan, $70 million, $71 million, that's nothing.
Yes.
Even for the state of Michigan,
it sounds
how
like
long can that last? Yeah. How long can the economy sustain a shutdown like this in your eyes? Because I know the last time this happened was 2019, 35 days. It cost tens of billions of dollars.
Yes, it did. Yeah, actually, I just saw some estimates actually coming from the Congressional Budget Office saying that they estimate that at this point the shutdown will cost $7 billion in lost growth of gross domestic product every month that it continues. So if it goes 6 weeks, then you're talking $8 billion. If it goes longer, then and you can kind of do the math there. But the problem is that we don't know how long it's going to last, and the uncertainty is really what kind of hurts people. And that's money, by the way, that we'll never make back, essentially.
And the uncertainty is, again, going back to how we started this, what drives the economy and consumer confidence, which then affects the long-term goals here, which is try to balance things out. But Michael Greiner with Oakland University, it is good to see you. We thank you for joining us here tonight on The Pulse. And by the way, there is something you can do. Call your lawmakers, and not just the ones you like, the ones you don't like, the ones you like. Everyone should be calling all your lawmakers and say, get your act together. That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was great to be with you. We're still on here. Great to see you. Yeah, thank you so much.